Welcome, Venerable.
Hello. Thank you so much, everyone. Happy to
Good
see you.
evening.
Good evening. Our
Yes.
final week of Wisdom on Emptiness.
Yes.
And
So let's, yeah, good. So we think we gain yet again every time we do this. We offer all the contents of the universe, imagining, using our creative imagination, to the Buddha as a request for these teachings, to receive the blessings of these experiences of the Buddha, in the hope that we can have the same experiences. So we're making an offering of all the marvelous things in the universe as a request for the teaching, as if we're having them from the Buddha himself.
Sashi perki joshing meto Jamri rablinji Nidek yan padi Sange shindu mekche ubayi Doko nanda shingla chepaksho Jetsun lama dan pakyenam Kiche kikala Kien se chu tsin tsin, di ta san pe du che zin ma la, sa ke chu ki cha pa va tu so, idam guru ratna mantala kamiya chayami.
Remind ourselves of our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings, and make this strong aspiration that the virtuous karmic seeds we plant in our mind from listening to these teachings eventually will ripen as our Buddhahood, because then we're qualified perfectly to be of benefit to others. So I'll say it in English one time a bit extensively, and then we can say it 2 times in Tibetan. So we're thinking, until we are enlightened, until we become a Buddha, no matter how long it takes, doesn't matter. We're going to rely upon the teachings of the Buddha. I mean, the Buddha himself, his teachings, and the community of practitioners. So, and by the virtuous karmic seeds we plant in our mind, because everything we think and do and say plant seeds in the mind, from listening to these teachings. As a result of these, may we become a Buddha eventually, no matter how long it takes, so that we can benefit all sentient beings, lead them to their own enlightenment, show them the way. Sangye charang tsoke chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chernyen gi pesonam ki drola penche sangye drupashog sangye charang tsoke chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chernyen gi pesonam ki drola penche sangye drupashog. Okay, let's recite the Heart Sutra.
coming up.
So move it up a bit so we don't need to see the heading. Move it up a bit. We don't need to see the heading. Just move a bit. Move it a bit already. We don't need to see the heading. The other way. Move it along. That's it. There we go. So I prostrate to the 3 noble rare sublime ones. So thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on massive Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. So what you're visualizing is up in Vulture Peak, not very far from Rajagriha, little spot up in a hill. There's Buddha in meditation. He's not speaking, he's in meditation. And basically he's channeling his thoughts into the minds of his disciples, Avalokitesvara's 10th level bodhisattva and Shariputra, and they're having this discussion. But it's Buddha's teachings. This is apparently how Buddha gave his teachings quite often. So also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent existence, of inherent nature. Then through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form, and form is also not other than emptiness. So in the same way, and so this is basically the list. This is that's the 5 aggregates. So we're listing everything. So in the same way, feeling, obviously, doesn't matter, forget that. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, composition factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, and not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. No visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There's no eye element, and so forth, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the 3 times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it's not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Ta ta om gate gate paragate parasam gate bodhi swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. It is said that, thank you. It is said that this is spoken from the perspective of somebody. We're finished now. That's it. It's spoken from the perspective of a person absorbed in the realization of the emptiness of inherent existence. Okay, so like we talked last week, first of all, the broader point, always the broader point, always the broader point. Everything in all that Buddha's teaching, especially where it's presented in the Lamrim, is leading us one logical step at a time to this conclusion. That's the wisdom teachings. Then you have the Mahayana, the Bodhisattva part. That's the compassion wing. But from starting with renunciation, what's implied in all these teachings is the meaning is, for example, with karma is dependent arising, the king of logics to prove emptiness. In the second scope, where we really get renunciation, when we start to understand how all the delusions not only are disturbing, but they're delusional, they're liars, they're misconceptions. And that's the key point. Once we can understand this point, I would say in Buddhist teachings, it leads us really easily to get our head around this approach to emptiness. The struggle we have is, like we've talked all the time, the struggle we have is to try and get our head around the idea that emptiness is an existent, real phenomenon. It's a characteristic of what exists, not that the words seem to indicate to us that it's pointing to nothingness. This is the major mistake. And until we can get our head clear about this, we're going to be going in the wrong direction. We will not understand what Buddha's talking about. So like I've been saying, it's an abstract phenomenon. Like I'm using the ordinary examples like absence of tea and absence of money, the absence of something. You can't point to it, you can't taste it, you can't touch it, you can't smell it. But it's a very real phenomenon that you do observe when you pick up your cup expecting tea and you get a shock because you expected tea, and what you discovered instead was the absence of tea. It's a vivid, real phenomenon. It's something that's shocking. Of course, that's it's an unhappiness. It's an unhappy emptiness, of course, an unhappy absence. The absence we're describing here, if for the greatest yogis, as Lama Zopa says, it is beyond joy to discover for the first time in the subtlest level of their shamatha, their non-conceptual level of mind gained by perfecting shamatha, by perfecting samadhi, when they discover for the first time the absence of what they thought and has thought since beginningless time has existed, but in fact has never, does not, and can never exist. That is a shocking and an amazing and radical absence to discover. And that's what we're discussing here. So the major problem, as I've been saying, is that, when we hear that nothing has an intrinsic nature, that everything is empty, then we can't help but hear. It means literally you chuck out everything and you find nothing. This is not, as His Holiness says, things are not empty of intrinsic existence. Things are not empty of independent existence. Things are not, I'm using all the synonyms, things are not empty of existing from their own side. Things are not empty of self-existence. Things are not empty of existing in and of themselves. These are the synonyms. Because you can't find the thing, an intrinsic thing. You won't find one. But that's not the real premise. Things are empty of independent existence because they are dependent arisings. This is what we have to get used to thinking. So this is the two truths, this is the best framework. There are many logical arguments we need to use to prove this fact to ourselves in meditation, so we can release ourselves from suffering, be beyond fear, as the teachings say. And the king of logics, quoting Ramayeshe, paraphrasing Buddha, Tsongkhapa Buddha, is the king of logic is dependent arising. So, and it grounds us. So when you think the word simply, the two truths, one, the conventional, things have a conventional reality. And shorthand for that is dependent arising. They come into existence in dependence upon various factors. They exist in dependence upon various factors, conventionally. And that is the logic to prove how they exist ultimately, which is they lack independent existence. It's the opposite of dependent arising. Things exist interdependently, which proves they lack independent existence. They're utterly saying the same thing. And this keeps us this prevents us, as Tsongkhapa says, from falling into the abyss of the great mistake, and this assumption that that there is nothing, and and you leave it there. No, not like that. So the thing to help us understand this too, as I've been talking, is when we understand the way the mind works. The job of the mind is to cognize things, to know things, to be aware. These words are synonymous. That's its job, its function. Everything has a function. And the function of mind, of consciousness, is to cognize. So the question is, to cognize what, please, Buddha? Well, obviously, to cognize that which exists. This is the whole point. This is Buddha's entire point, to get us to be in touch with that which exists, which implies, at the moment, we are in touch with masses of phenomena that simply don't exist. We cognize things that don't exist. We cognize non-existence. So what is an example of a non-existent? Well, a conventional level even. If you've got your attachment glasses on, you're cognizing on that plate an extremely delicious chocolate cake that appears, and this is where now through the lenses of ignorance, maripa, the root delusion which informs attachment, because of that ignorance. So because of the attachment, the lie of attachment, it appears overly delicious. And because of ignorance, it appears to be on that plate from its own side, in and of itself, intrinsically delicious, meaning delicious from its side, from the side of the cake. The deliciousness is vibrating from the cake. And we utterly believe that. And the whole universe appears like this. It comes from the object. We don't think it comes from the mind. And this is the real point. So that's a lie. They are lies. They are things that don't exist. The intrinsically existent delicious cake simply doesn't exist. The cake that appears back to us through the lenses of these lies does not exist. This is the way to say it. So what we're trying to cognize is, well, then what does exist? So this is the point. The Buddha would say, from the side of the cake, on that plate, from the side of the cake, there is no intrinsic, in and of itself, independent, delicious cake. From the side of the cake, that does not exist from the side of the cake. That's a projection made up by our fantasies. So from the side of the cake, you will not find even one atom of anything that makes it a delicious cake. The final understanding is it's merely labeled delicious chocolate cake. Merely labeled is the subtlest way that it does exist interdependently. So when we hear that there is no cake from its own side, we hear there's no cake and we chuck the baby out the bathwater. We fall into the abyss of the great mistake. But in dependent rising, conventionally, there is a cake. So as Lama Zopa says, when you realize the emptiness of the intrinsic existence of the delicious chocolate cake, it's as if there is no delicious chocolate cake, ultimately. But conventionally, there is a delicious chocolate cake. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't exist. This is a perfect way to kind of hear the words, very tasty, you know. So emptiness of intrinsic existence of a chocolate cake does not deny the existence of a delicious chocolate cake. And conventionally, a dependent arising chocolate cake doesn't tell us that it's intrinsically existent. So it's a really fine point that we need to get when we hear these two truths. One implies the other, not denies the other. At the moment, we have the two wrong views in our mind, and we hear one denies the other. The commonest one is, oh, well, if there's no cake, if there's no intrinsic cake, there must be no cake. Not like that. And that's what Lord Buddha is telling us in the Heart Sutra, when he says form, which is one example of the millions of phenomena that exist in the universe, the first of the 5 aggregates in this presentation of the different categories of things that exist in the impermanent world, these categories we just went through. Form, for example, you can say chocolate cake there, it makes no difference, anything you can say there. So delicious chocolate cake is empty. And then he says, emptiness is delicious chocolate cake. And then he says, delicious chocolate cake is emptiness, and emptiness is delicious chocolate cake. All he's saying is that the absence of inherent delicious chocolate cake, the absence or the emptiness or the lack of independent delicious chocolate cake, that phenomenon, the emptiness of intrinsic existent delicious chocolate cake, is a characteristic of a conventional delicious chocolate cake. Form, delicious chocolate cake is empty. Then so spelling it out, the dependent arising delicious chocolate cake is empty of existing independently. And then the emptiness of independent existent delicious chocolate cake is conventional delicious chocolate cake. You can't have the emptiness of a delicious chocolate cake without a conventional chocolate cake, because emptiness of delicious chocolate cake is a characteristic of the thing that exists. But this existence is finer and more subtler than we can hear. And we can't hear it without understanding emptiness. And we can't understand emptiness without understanding dependent arising. This is the thing to get used to become familiar with, to think through, to squeeze your brain, as Lamayeshi says, to at least intellectually get these words to be clear in your mind. And then they will lead you to the meditation experience of the truth of that. This is why words are so powerful, concepts are so powerful, you know. Many people say, oh, I'm not an intellectual, I don't want the words, I just want the experience. Well, I'm sorry, that's like saying, I don't want to listen to Bach's theory, I just want to play it. I mean, it's kind of schizophrenic. Okay, we know about Mahamudra, an advanced technique where a person can go to the piano without intellectual knowledge and intuit Bach. That's Mahamudra. We must try that, but it's pretty advanced. The irony is the yogi who can get a direct experience of Mahamudra in that non-conceptual meditation of emptiness is the one who's done the study and squeezed their brains in the past. Their minds are primed and ready and ripe. So one thing to get is that the emptiness is an existent phenomenon. The emptiness of inherent existence can be cognized by the mind, and that by definition tells us that it is an existent thing. The definition of an existent is that which can be cognized by mind. So when I look at my cup and I'm expecting tea, I am definitely cognizing a very vivid phenomenon called the absence of my precious tea. When I'm expecting my $5,000 in the bank and I see the zero there, what I actually cognize is the absence of my precious $5,000. So the absence of something is a vivid, real, powerful phenomenon that does exist. The phenomenon called the emptiness of tea, the emptiness of intrinsic existence, the emptiness of $5,000. It's a phenomenon. It's a proactive. It's a phenomenon. It's something that exists. There's a way to get your head around it like this. Not, oh, there's no tea, might as well kill myself. Oh, there's no dollars. In other words, nihilism. Not like that. Not like that. Not like that. So let me just read. Lama Zopa Rinpoche teaches almost exclusively in relation to the subtlest level of dependent arising, which everything is merely labeled. So as we discussed briefly, there's one type of analysis that's crucial, which is the 4-point analysis, where you first establish what you think the I is. You then establish the parameters of what the I could be. It's either oneness with or separate from the aggregates. And then you proceed to prove that you can neither find it among the aggregates, nor is it oneness with the aggregates. And then that's the kind of classic analytical meditation that you do to conclude there is no intrinsic I. So Rinpoche, when he teaches, though, all the time, from the point of view that something is merely labeled by the mind, you know. So Rinpoche talks all the time, we've got the base. So he just use the example here of a mug, for example. A mug, because this refers to any phenomenon that exists. First, you have the base, and then you have the label. So in terms of the person, you have the base, which is the 5, is more Buddha's particular presentation of the 5 aggregates. We can just as easily say we can look at the base is mind and body, or we can list 47 different parts. It doesn't matter. The base is the parts of something. And then you have the name you put upon those parts. And one of the key arguments is to try, one of the mistakes we make is to think, well, this is me. All of this is me. So as Lama Zopa says, the base cannot be the label. So the label is I, but it can't be the same phenomenon as the parts. So why not? Well, first of all, one argument is we say the words I, one phenomenon, have a nose, another phenomenon. That an I is one phenomenon. You establish what the I is, you give it a definition, you tell us what its job is. Then you have another phenomenon called a nose. And a nose is the part of a person, of an I. Nose is a part of an I that breathes. So the definition of nose is completely definition from an I. They're two separate phenomena. They're separate phenomena. They cannot be the same. So when you posit something as existing, you first give it a label. then you must give it a definition, which tells us what it is. It tells us the meaning. So a cup, the mug. Mug, what's a mug, mummy? It's the name we give, darling, she will tell us, to that phenomenon on that table that you see. One part of the definition is the flat-bottomed, let's say, clay container. That's a good part. The first part of the definition, the flat-bottomed clay container, and maybe it has a handle. So I can see that. That's its conventional characteristics. The second part of the definition tells us the job, the function of that mug. Well, sweetheart, it holds my tea. Now, that's the definition of a phenomenon called a mug. Now, we think, well, it's all the mug. Oh, I see, the handle is the mug, is it, Ravina? Well, what's a handle? Well, that's a name we give to its parts. So what is a handle? That is, it is a semicircular piece of clay, you could say, stuck to the base of a mug. Number two, what is its function? It helps you hold the mug. Now, that is not the definition of a mug, is it? That's the definition of a part of a mug. Well, what's the definition of a person? Well, I forget, frankly. I can't remember what a person is. Let's just say a sentient being, a mind possessor. A mind possessor. A mind possessor. So that's, we could say that's the term we can use to refer to a person. So so we can imply that, so the function of a mind possessor is to create karma. Now, what's a nose? What's the definition of a nose? Well, that's a part of a person that helps you breathe. That's a different phenomenon, a different label, and a different definition, and a different function. So how can person be the same as nose? So how can person the same as a hand? How can person be the same as brain? They're different names, different functions, different phenomena. This is the type of argument you need to use to prove that the I can't be oneness with the parts. The base, the parts, is not the I. Now, this is the part that's tricky. I is not the same as the parts because I is the name you give to the parts. They are different, but you can't, they're not separate. You can't, if you remove a nose, you can't remove a nose from a person. I mean, you can, but a nose, you can't have a person. I mean, you can have a person without a nose, and you can, but you won't have a nose without a person. A nose sitting on the floor just is a piece of caca, you know. So you can't. So then the I and the parts are different phenomena, but they are inseparable. You can't have one without the other. So handle or base is a better example. The base of a mug is one part of a mug. So how could you separate the base from the mug? If you did, you wouldn't have a mug. How can you separate the mind from a person? The mind is not the person, and a person is not the mind. They're different phenomena, different functions. But if you remove a mind from the parts, you don't have a person. So they're different, but inseparable. This is the way to understand. You see, this type of analysis is way more precise than we would ever tend to think. We're very vague how we use terms. Oh, well, there's a mug, here's me. And what we don't realize when we say that statement, it is riddled with this mistake of intrinsic I, intrinsic mug. And that's so implicit, that mistake is so utter in our minds, we don't recognize it. That's why we've got to unpack it like this and slowly squeeze our brains to try and see the mistake that this ignorance, this root ignorance is making, because seen through the lens of ignorance, which is how we see everything. Everything, as Lama Zopa says, appears back to us wrongly. And because we've been seeing things wrongly for eons, we believe what we see. This is the worst mistake. Bad enough, as Lama Zopa says, that we see things wrongly through the lenses of ignorance. But the worst thing is we believe it. So as Rinpoche says, you know, I'll just read some of these teachings, you know. So in the beginning, seeing the base, the parts of the mug, what it does, the mind just makes up, then the mind makes up the label mug. You know, you were taught this label by others, by a parent or somebody, you know. So there is the base, the flat bottom clay container, and then the label is merely put upon it. We put the label mug, we call it mug. Then that is how it came into existence. That is how everything in the universe comes into existence, by being labeled by the mind. This is why the example Lama Zopa would say, if you don't feel abused, where is the abuse? So merely labeled means someone could punch you in the nose. Like, for example, when I did Kung Fu, I got punched in the nose. I did not label it abuse. In fact, I would apologize. I was taught by Mr. Lee, I should apologize to my partner when they punched me in the nose because I didn't get out of the way in time. So I did not label it as abuse. So there is no abuse. So it's only abuse if you label it abuse. It doesn't mean that you didn't want to abuse me. You might want to kill me. That's not being discussed here. Things come into existence, finally into existence, based upon the mind calling it that. Now, then we hear, oh, well, the mind makes everything up. So Buddha is, so I just make up Buddha, I make up mug. No, that's nihilistic, not like that. There is a base. There has to be a valid base for the label Buddha. And what's the definition of a Buddha? That's the name given to a mind that has perfected wisdom and compassion, that can see the universe, that's omniscient and omnipotent and infinitely compassionate. That's a valid base. You've got to have a valid base that functions according to the label, that functions validly. That's the valid base for the label Buddha. This is the way we have to get to think, okay? The mind labels mug and then believes in it. So after your mind labels mug, you see, the thing is, it appears first when we don't know, especially when you don't know something. Like they always use the example if you have a child, you want to give them a name. So the child there, you see a child, there's no name yet. So you think, I'll call them Mary. But within 1 second already, you begin to see that Mary is in the person rather than the name you gave them. You gave that name. And then what happens is you see Mary from their own side. This is how the whole universe exists. This is why one of the most powerful practices is to even as Pabonka Rinpoche says, even we don't understand, even intellectually, this idea of emptiness, even to just remember that everything, that things don't exist the way they appear to us. So that even the words for that is they appear self-existent. They appear, mug appears to come from that base. Mugness seems to be there, and where this innocent kind of onlooker observing this mug that's over there. That's how the whole world appears. This is a dualistic way the whole world appears to us because of this maripa, this ignorance, you know. So after your mind merely imputes mug, then there is the projection, the hallucination of this inherent existence decorated on the merely labeled mug. It's decorated there by the negative imprint left on the mind by eons of past practice, you know. Then you see the mug as real. After just a second or two, you see the real mug on the merely imputed mug. The mug that your mind merely imputed just seconds before now appears back to you as a real, intrinsic, I was adding more words, real, mug, independent from your mind. That's the real meaning, independent from your mind, independent from the label you just gave it. That's the way the world appears to us. And this is the root mistake. The mug that your mind merely imputed just seconds before now appears back to you as a real mug, as existing from its own side, not merely labeled by the mind. Then you let your mind hold on to that as true. That is the ignorance, the basis for all the other delusions. So all the delusions, like I've been saying, share the job of exaggerating, embellishing, decorating. This is the root one. And this underpins the other ones. Attachment exaggerates deliciousness. Anger exaggerates ugliness. Ignorance underpins both of them. They're like the branch delusions, you know. What this ignorance believes, that this is a truly existent mug, and that because of that, it appears, it must be true, is not there at all, does not exist at all, not even the slightest atom, not even something that size, not even the subtlest thing exists from its own side. In all the Buddha's teachings, there's a text that you study called Buddhist Tenets, and there's a presentation of like 25, 50, 60 different fine variations of the viewpoints, particularly about emptiness. And that's just the Indian views. Since Buddhism has been in Tibet for 1200, 1400 years, you could also start to establish, even among the Tibetan views, many different variations of interpretations of this emptiness, you know. So the view we're discussing here, so first of all, you've got the Hinayana and the Mahayana views. So the Hinayana views are known as Theravada, is probably the one only remaining of the 18 sub-schools of one of the Hinayana views. And that's the Theravada view. This is the teachings you'll study in Burma or Thailand. And then you've got the Mahayana, and within the Mahayana, you have the Chittamatra and the Madhyamika. And then within each of those, you've got subdivisions as well. So it's really refined, subtle, fascinating presentation of the different conceptual views of this meaning of this emptiness. And they're said to be all taught by the Buddha, but for different types of minds, you know. So the view we're discussing here, which is said to be the actual view of the Buddha, is one of the Mahayana views, the Madhyamika, the middle way, and within that, one that's called the Prasangika, or the consequentialist. That's this view that we're discussing here, which is said to be the actual meaning of emptiness. Of course, you have to find out. Just believe it. So the real mug, what we call the real mug, what we believe to be the real mug, is not there at all. It's an hallucination. It doesn't exist there at all. It's totally empty. If you look for it, you can't find it. If you don't look, it looks like it is there. This is the object of ignorance. It looks like it is there, but if you analyze, where is it, this real mug? Here, here, here. If you look, you can't find it. So of course, these words on the surface seem silly, you know. So you've got to unpack them a bit. Got to get your definitions clear. Got to be precise. On each atom, you cannot find the real mug. On the pieces, you can't find the real mug. On the collection, you can't find it. Neither among the collection of the parts, nor on the individual pieces can you find the real mug. It's the same with the atoms. You can't find. Everything you posit is existing. It's the same discussion. So this is one characteristic of the emptiness presented in this view, the Prasangika Madhyamika, is that there's no distinction between the emptiness of persons and the emptiness of phenomena. The other schools make a distinction. There's different levels of emptiness. Some things have a true nature, some things don't. Here, the Prasangika is the same for all phenomena, all phenomena. This is why we're trying to do even first establish. This is why if you take the Lam Rim as your presentation of Buddha's views of the universe, the first stages of it are presenting the conventional world. Even now, not only do we have the mistake of ultimately making a mistake, but we don't even have conventional truth. So he presents karma, for example, which he says is what he has observed to be the conventional way that things exist. A mind is not physical, it is beginningless and endless. That's the Mahayana view, Madhyamika view, and everything it thinks and does and says produces that person. Now that's a conventional truth. We might believe there's a creator. We might believe mummy and daddy made us. We might believe our mind is the brain. They're even conventional misconceptions as far as the Buddha is concerned. I mean, it's up to us to decide what views we want to listen to. So at least getting it clear conventionally first, you're already on track, which implies getting rid of the grosser delusions, the grosser misconceptions. Then it leads us to easily be able to hear this subtlest one. It prepares us mentally, primes our mind, studying and practicing, taking the Lam Rim as your basis. It's the same with the I. You can't find the I on the collection of these 5 aggregates, you know. On the collection of the aggregates, you can't find the I. You can't find the real I on the collection of the 5. Same, real mug. If you look, you can't find the real mug on the collection. It's exactly the same. So this is the thing now. As I said before, these are 2 phenomena, the base and the label. Meaning, you see, phenomenon is anything that exists. A term, phenomenon, object, object of knowledge, existent, they're all synonyms for that which exists. And I remember, like I said, I find it delicious. The definition of an existent is that which can be cognized by mind. This is why the centrality of the mind in Buddhism is utterly important. To say that, in other words, is by definition, if your mind can cognize it, and it must be a valid cognition, that determines that it exists. This is a bit shocking. We don't think this in the modern scientific world. We don't trust the mind. To say that something's established by your cognizing it is very shocking. So it's axiomatic that if your mind can cognize something, a valid cognition, then by definition it exists. That's pretty tasty. Okay. Is there any questions, please? People, please? Doesn't matter if there aren't. Just listen, taste, meditate. Yes, Carol.
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you.
Oh, darling, thank you.
So,
Go on, just say.
by tracing back in meditation the birth and previous lives on previous lives, that helps realizing that the aggregates are it helps break everything up.
Exactly, darling. Exactly. Exactly. That's right. One of the this particularly that one is to help us realize that you're not going to come back to some intrinsic I. I mean, if we're a Christian or a Muslim, we track ourselves back to this. There is an intrinsic soul there that has this utter nature that's unchangeable and impermanent, and it comes from an intrinsic entity called God. So this is one of the things that going back past lives proves is we keep instinctively trying to find the first moment, which is one of the mistakes. To think there's a first moment, a first cause is one of the mistakes because we have ignorance. So tracking back, you're going to never find the first moment. And that helps you loosen the grip of this big fat me sitting called Carol in this body right now. Absolutely. There's been a million different me's. Me is the name, and me is a name that we can give to your mind. So before Carol, the label was Joan or Fred or dog or cat, but the continuity is there. So it helps definitely loosen the grip of first beginningless. It gets us to see that you can't get back to a first moment, which we desperately want and assume exists. But the Buddha's view is with just cause and effect. This is a conventional. Cause and effect is an excellent example of dependent arising. You cannot ever point to a thing that didn't have a cause. So the Christians have a very extensive philosophical teachings proving, they say, that you can have a first cause, which of course is God. But the Buddha would say that's not viable. So this helps you loosen the grip of a fundamentalist intrinsic little me in there. It loosens the grip of the concept of a creator, and it loosens the grip of ego grasping as well, because you're not going to pinpoint anything. You're going to keep going back. Yes, right. It's very helpful. It won't help you realize directly emptiness, but it's one of the many things we need to do to loosen the grip of the mistake. Because the mistake, we've got to prove that mind is beginningless. We've got to prove that mind is not physical. We've got to prove that we're not created by somebody else. We've got to prove that our mind is in the brain. All of these help us, lead us to the emptiness of intrinsic nature. It all leads to this. Yes, exactly, Carol. Thank you. What else?
Then we make ourselves.
Yeah. As His Holiness says, karma is like self-creation. We want to always point to something out there, which is very much we do with the materialist world. My mother and father made me. That's why we blame the outside people, or God made me. We're positing in both cases, we're at least agreeing, those two views agree there's somebody out there that made me. For the Buddha, that's a schizophrenic idea. I mean, he doesn't say it like that clearly. It's a wackiest idea. We are only the product of our own. We are impacted by other things, but the main cause of me, the main cause of my suffering and my happiness are the imprints in this continuity of consciousness that's always labeled me. Exactly, exactly, exactly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right, thank you. That's why the very first level of teachings, beginning to get in our heads around karma, really helps us loosen the grip of the self-pity me. I didn't ask to get born. It's not my fault. You start to take responsibility, and already that's loosening the grip of ego grasping, the root delusion. Absolutely. Prepares our mind. Absolutely. Yes. Who is there asking a question? Who's CB?
Cyril.
Yeah.
Yes,
Cyril. Okay, Cyril,
Venerable.
talk to me. Talk to me.
So why, when the mug appears back to me after having labeled it mug, it appears back to me as inherently existing, as having
Right.
mugness?
Exactly.
Why?
Exactly. Habit, that's all. Only habit. There's no secret, Cyril. The habit of doing this since beginningless time with every phenomenon. Simply, we're completely programmed. That's the only reason. There's no secret. It's just habit, Cyril. That's all. That's it. Just habit. As Lama Zopa says, because of the imprints of ignorance from having thought this before. Everything is habit, which is helps us know that we can change the habits. It's totally instinctive, absolutely prime. It's the most instinctive habit we have, to see things as self-existent. That's it. So that's why we have to keep breaking the habit. That's why Pabonka says, even you don't even know the meaning of emptiness, just to stop and say, Cyril, things don't exist the way they appear. Not even sure what it means. It'll put atomic bombs under those mistakes. And don't expect it to appear correctly to you. Now, it takes time. Just keep remembering, catching yourself. That's why everyday life, when you're annoyed with that driver, Cyril, it doesn't exist the way it appears. And this time through the lenses of anger. And just catch yourself. It's a powerful practice. It's amazing. But it's very, very primordially deep. I have to kind of be very humble about it. That's it. Do you understand, Cyril?
Thank you.
Good. Yes, Barbara.
Yes, thank you. I want to see if I understand this. I have a flower pot and I broke it just before we started, and it broke into 3 pieces. And when I looked at it, it doesn't look like a flower pot anymore. But then I was able to reassemble it. I was able to reassemble it, and now with a little bit of glue, like my perception changed.
Exactly.
So is something that is changeable and impermanent, does that imply emptiness?
Okay, it's a good question. It's a very good question. As I said before, if we're taking the Lam Rim and taking the teachings at different levels, then the teaching on impermanence is again one of Buddha's teachings, arguing with an instinctive view that sees things as unchanging. And that is not the same as seeing things as intrinsic. It's a grosser mistake. But wow, learning to realize things are not set in stone, they're not unchanging, can lead us to realizing that they're empty. It's a stepping stone. It's excellent. But it's a grosser mistake. But so we start with that one. At least we can realize that things are impermanent. Then that's already a profound realization. It'll loosen the grip and make us much more amenable to realizing the subtler one, that there's no intrinsic nature. In fact, in some of the earlier schools of thought, they talk about subtle impermanence and gross impermanence, and the realization of subtle impermanence, which is to say the very coming into being of something implies its cessation. That can only be recognized in meditation. And that is seen in one of the schools of thought as actually an example of gross selflessness. So we can even think that impermanence is emptiness, but it's leading to it. They're different, but it's definitely a stepping stone. Thank you, Barbara. Yes. Are there any other questions there, Tara?
No question.
All right. Okay. So, I mean, this is the one we can put into practice every single day, So it's the subtlest meaning, merely labeled, but it's so evident that we can use it every second, because we can see every day our minds, based on our delusions have this function of being very rigid, very concrete, very absolute. And we believe when you're annoyed, which means a mild version of anger is in your mind, the thing or the person you're angry with appears with absolute certainty in a certain way to you. You've just painted a picture of that person, and there's not a millionth of a second of doubt in our mind that we are right. Now, this is where we have to be much more precise. I'm not saying that Tara didn't punch me in the nose. She did. That's not what's being argued with. When you're really delusional is if you think she did punch you, but she didn't punish you. That's really delusional. So she did punch me, but we assume anger is a natural response. So then naturally, when I have anger in my mind towards Tara, anger is painting a picture of very ugly Tara. That's the lie. She did punch me, but the lie of anger over-exaggerates her badness. It takes one aspect of Tara and paints the whole of Tara with that one. We can see that we do that. It's so evident. This is really clear. So this, in this simple way, we have to learn to think, yes, she did punch me, but anger is a different discussion. Anger is a response to that. And it's all based on the belief in an I, and then the anger is a response when the I's attachment didn't get what it wanted, and the stronger the ego grasping, the stronger attachment, the stronger the anger, the uglier Tara will look, and the more absolute certainty I will have that my view of her is that she's a monster. So these are the types of lies you have to unpack, you know. It's not being nihilistic and say she didn't punch me. She did. Okay, many times we can believe someone did do something they even didn't do. That's a double extra lie. We believe we're making up things all the time, you know. But the way the delusions themselves function is they embellish, they decorate, they exaggerate. When we can get this, we've really got some insight into the way the Buddhist says the mind works, you know. And to stop, and to try, and that's why conventionally first, in the middle scope, you're working with attachment and anger and the branch delusions. You're working with the disturbing emotional component because you're sick of suffering, but you start to see that they also embellish. And you stop trying to believe those ones. You know, I mean, attachment is clearly a good example. It is an over-exaggeration of the status of the cake. And that's provable within 10 minutes. We all know this, but we don't join the dots, do we? The cake looks so divine in the beginning, you can't almost contain yourself. And divineness is definitely in the cake. But then after 4 pieces, we all know this. This is scientific proof that the cake is not intrinsically delicious because now it looks repulsive. So it's we clearly can prove these mistakes, but we just don't join the dots, you know. It's obvious. I mean, look at the partners we have. Relationships. 1 minute you're in love, think they're a saint, then before you know it, they're disgusting. And we believe each one as an absolute truth. So we're kind of lunging from these one lie after another. We wonder why we're crazy, you know. It's clear we're crazy because we're believing all our own lies. So to catch this is so profound. And these are the conventional lies, attachment and aversion. So you got to loosen them first. Then you can start to loosen the grip of the root delusion, you know. What else, people? Questions. I'll just read you some more words from Lama Zopa. He's so tasty with this. And this is what you can apply every day, you know, every day. This is like not just in your meditation, daily life, when everything is jumping at you, appearing as real from its own side at you all the time. Let me find this is some editing I'm doing lately. Where is it all? Okay. What is this one? What's this chapter? Okay.
Lorna has a question.
Okay, good, Lorna. Talk to me, darling.
Hi, Robina. Thank you so much.
Yeah, good.
So just once again, for clarification, what I'm thinking of is emptiness is obvious as well when different people have a different opinion about the same
That's
object.
right. Exactly.
So it's like if I say, you know,
Everything.
that car is really beautiful and someone goes,
That's right.
I disagree with that. That
That's it.
immediately proves the emptiness of the car.
Absolutely. It really does. It really, that's exactly the point. Every second of the day, we can prove immediately that things are merely labeled. And okay, there are subtler understandings of this merely labeled, clearly, but we can start with this view. It's so clear, but we have to grab because we love our own opinions. We're totally attached, aren't we, to our opinions as being right. I mean, look at the world. It's so evident, isn't it? But the problem is that often we can chuck the baby out. Sometimes though we can be nihilistic about it and chuck the baby out for the bathwater and think there's nothing existing. Oh, it's all just viewpoint. It's all just opinions. We can still kind of be grounded, you know. There are some facts. There are facts existing. So yes, it's a good point. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
So from beginningless rebirth, this is why, Cyril, it's so hard, you know. Hang on, let's say some more things here. Right. Yeah. So for those who haven't realized emptiness, our mind doesn't realize, doesn't see things in this way, does not see the very nature of phenomena. That's ignorance. In the view of this ignorance, according to the point of view of ignorance, ignorance is the word we're using here, the word maripa, and we're talking about the root ignorance that sees things as intrinsic. There's many levels of ignorance, obviously, this word maripa, and the root one is the one that sees things have an intrinsic nature, the root delusion, such that when it's uprooted by the realization of emptiness, you've cut the root of suffering. So for those who haven't realized emptiness, so in the view of this ignorance, according to the point of view of ignorance, according to the interpretation of this ignorance, things exist from their own side. Again, there are many synonyms. I think the key word, the one key word they use in the Prasangikas is inherent, within the thing, intrinsic, inherent. It's delicious. But the word that seems to me to be clearly meaningful is the word independent. Independent. So independent. So there are various synonyms that things have an independent nature, intrinsic nature, inherent nature, a self-existent nature. They exist in and of themselves, or they exist from their own side. Hear these words alone. When you hear these and try to taste these, they're telling us clearly the meaning. And they all come down to being the finalist one, the final one of everything existing independently, in particular of the mind labeling it that. That's the subtlest one. I mean, the analysis we do when we're looking for the I in here is we're looking for an I that's independent of the parts. That's one example. Finally, we'll come to the conclusion that there's no I independent of anything, including in particular the mind labeling it, that everything is conventionally. So emptiness is saying nothing has there's nothing existing that's independent of the mind. And then the conventional way of putting it is that everything is merely labeled. That's the conventional way of stating. Everything lacks independence of the mind labeling it. And then the conventional way of putting it is that it's merely labeled. It's merely labeled. That's its conventional nature, merely labeled. So because of the past ignorance, this is the habit, Cyril, the concept of inherent existence, we hold the I, we hold the merely labeled I, the I that is merely labeled by the mind, we hold that as inherently existent. Apprehend, hold on to this I as inherently existent. It's like that with everything, the way ignorance views everything. So because the past ignorance has left an imprint, so everything we do and think and say programs our mind, imprints on our mind. So that's the point. Nothing ever goes astray. So this is a totally primordial habit. It's the habit of every sentient being, from the hells to the spirits, to the humans, the animals, the gods, to the highest level. And this is where Buddha diverged, finally, from the different views of these amazing Indian masters. I mean, recently, there's a letter I just put online in my Q&A thing on the website, a letter recently from a friend who's got excellent understanding of the different Hindu views. And it's fascinating. I mean, because the words sound the same. The words sound the same. But Buddha diverged in his own direction, because it seems to be, from according to the Buddha, you can, let me just read you. I'll see if I can find that part and I'll read out of interest. Some of you had interest in the Hindu teachings. Just a moment, see if I can find it. It's very interesting. Okay. So this is just from a teaching discussing. So in Hinduism, by achieving karma binding, Shine, they're the ones who invented this, genius Indians. As Holiness says, you know, these Indians more than 3,000 years ago are the ones that began the investigation to self, into nature of self. So in Hinduism, and I mean, he's using that as a broad label because there are many, many philosophies, many viewpoints in the Indian, I haven't studied them at all. So he's using this as a general term, okay, for the Indian scholars and yogis and saints. By achieving karma binding, Shine, you can realize that the desire realm is totally in the nature of suffering. So desire realm means all the gods, the certain level of that from the Christian point of view, the God realms or paradise as the Muslim call them, that's the peak. This utterly radiantly blissful state of mind, which is the fruit of much virtue, that it manifests in a realm of existence of utter bliss, utter, you can't conceive of the joy. And the bodies are made of light. These are the God realms or heaven or paradise, and they last for eons. That's the Christian view of the peak. The Hindus have a subtler view. So they've already proved, you can already prove with Shine, just by practicing Shine, that desire realm is totally in the nature of suffering. In other words, that level of joy is gross in comparison with what can be achieved. And that because of that, you can develop a total aversion for and renunciation of the desire realm. That's the humans and the gods. So after achieving Shine, which is preparation for firm mental contemplation, you achieve a mental body and are born in the form realm. There's even a subtler level. In Hinduism, you can also realize how the entire form realm is only in the nature of suffering, and through detachment, develop renunciation of that. Then through the 6 comprehensions, you can achieve the levels of the formless realm, limitless sky, limitless consciousness, nothingness, and the tip of samsara. And you can realize that each level offers progressively more peace and indeed more joy. The practitioner can even realize that the first 3 levels of the formless realm are only in the nature of suffering and become totally detached, but not, and this is Buddha's point, not the last one, the tip of samsara. They cannot realize how that is in the nature of suffering because there is no higher realm in samsara to compare it with. So the tip of samsara is the very last one, the highest in samsara. Therefore, they can never realize that it is in the nature of samsara. Now, the thing is, this letter my friend wrote, and I answered it in the Q&A on my website, that, you know, the words, I mean, she quoted some of the great yogis, the Hindu yogis, the words sound identical, but it's exactly the same. Even in the Buddhist views, they all sound identical. This is why we can't just believe the words. We have to look and see if there is a subtler meaning. And this is why it's really quite nuanced. It's quite subtle. And it's not just, oh, you know, the Hindus are wrong and Buddha's right. Oh, the Prasangikas are right and they're wrong. It's just so naive. We've got to do incredible inner work to discover the truth of these things. And as the Dalai Lama keeps telling us, if the Buddha is wrong, you're going to find out. And you'll say, thank you, Buddha, goodbye. So this is the point at which Buddha diverged. He went as far as he could go in that system, which is pretty incredible. And then it is said he found there are still more subtle mistakes in the mind to be removed, which is where he then talks about emptiness of Atman, emptiness of self, you know, emptiness of creators and things. So because there's no emptiness mentioned in Hinduism, I mean, they say the word emptiness, so please, I mean, Rinpoche is just talking, they cannot get a realization of this emptiness, the wisdom of directly perceiving emptiness. Therefore, because they cannot generate renunciation of the whole of samsara, when the karma of being in that realm finishes, they are reborn again in the lower realms or the human realm. So the same with God realms. If you're in the God realms and you think it's the end, you think you've found the end result, you use up the karma, you've still got ego grasping, you still have ignorance, maripa, and then negative karma ripens again. This is Buddha's point. You've got to find out this. And he's saying that when you've realized in the subtleness of Shine, with much analysis from practicing hard, that you will not find this intrinsic I. And we've got to look at that because those words can be used by all the different systems. We have to really see the difference. And that's why in the Tibetan monastic university system, based on the Indian one, especially in Nalanda monastery, years and years looking at the finer different points of the different schools, arguing the different Buddhist schools and the different views before that. So I mean, it's highly sophisticated, even just intellectually. And to even get an intellectual understanding, don't discount that. But the danger for us in our culture, we're so intellectually clever, we can get captivated by the intellectual. And that's something I said to this person who wrote to me. We can be captivated intellectually. And then what we try to do is we put everything together as, oh, that all means the same thing. We like to make it like that. It's kind of like we're captivated, and you never see the difference intellectually. You've got to dig down deep. And that's why you have to choose one approach. They all might come to the same thing, or they might not, but you can't practice all at once. It's impossible. Like I said to her, you know, even if you're just playing the piano, I mean, one teacher will say, put your elbow this way, and another teacher will tell you to put your elbow that way. You can't do the two at the same time. You've got to choose one path. And then from choosing that path, you go in deep. And then as you progress, you will find the similarities. You will connect with the others, you know. Like I said, for me, when I first met the Lamas, I fell into their lap. I wasn't looking even for Buddhism. It's sort of my conditions, my own karma led me to this particular course, you know, in Chen Raising Institute in Australia. And I heard these teachings. I didn't think, oh, this is Buddhism. I didn't know. I didn't Tibetan Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism. I had no idea. As for not to mention I didn't know Gulugpa and Nyingmapa. I didn't know Hindu, Buddha. I didn't know all the labels. I fell into their lap. And here I am all these years later, practicing this particular approach. But now I've got teachers in the Nyingma tradition. I've got teachers in the Kagyu. I've got teachers in the Sakya. And the more I hear their teachings from a different perspective, it helps me deepen my understanding. But to try and practice all at once is schizophrenic. It's not possible. And it can be very captivating intellectually of they're all the same. This is the biggest mistake we can make. You'll never get far with that view, you know. It's not going to help. Got to practice. Got to taste. So the Buddha talks about three levels of suffering. There's the suffering of the lower realms. Well, the Hindus have found cessation of that. There's the suffering of the desire realm. You can cease that. Then you've got the form and formless realms. But the Buddha says the third level of suffering, so the suffering of change, the suffering of change, which is the desire realm, then you've got all pervasive suffering. And that can only be ceased by realizing emptiness. Cut the root of all suffering. Okay, no more questions. Any questions there? Anybody got any questions? What time is it? We're okay. Okay, so there's so much we can talk about, but I really want you to read Thupten Pende's course notes. You know, he goes into much more detail. I'll try to get the overview, you know. The overview is so important. Then they've got to go to the details. Any questions, people? Anything at all? Bring up anything. Whatever you like. Oh, nothing. Okay. So the main thing we're discussing here is one way we're discussing the approach is the two truths. There's a conventional reality. Things have a conventional existence, and then we have an ultimate existence. And we're trying to get these two together. You know, they don't contradict, they imply each other. The king of logics. Dependent arising is the king of logics to prove emptiness. Excuse me. So what we're trying to do also is one argument that Rinpoche is talking, the label is at the base, which is trying to disprove that this is all of me. And the other one we're trying to disprove is there's an I that's separate from the parts, you know, the I that's the owner of the parts. The I that's the owner of the parts. We have to use logical arguments to show how that can't be. So one very clear one, if there, you know, like we just did this not this time, but like I use the, let's say, you know, you've got parts, you've got lots of parts. The second level of dependent arising is that I exists independent upon its parts. But you won't find an I among the parts, because I is a label on the parts, which is what we're discussing. So to try and prove the I can't be found as a separate component, I mean, the way we think now, I is like a boss part in here. It's like the main part. It's like the boss, you know, that runs the show. It runs the nose and the ear and the anger and the love and the compassion. They're the parts. And the I is like a big main part that runs everything. That's the feeling we have. And the Buddha says, like, that's why I use the IKEA example. IKEA, you go to buy a box of, you buy a Ribena, and you get a million parts. You've got to put them together. Well, the feeling we have is you're going to find one envelope with a label on it, Robina, such that when that's plugged in, the whole thing will work. But Buddha says you don't need that. You don't need that. You don't need an I to run the show. In the same way that he says you don't need a creator to run the universe, which is a shock for the Muslims and the Christians. It's like the worst sin possible. This is the teaching of dependent arising and karma. You don't need a creator. We don't need a punisher and a rewarder. We don't need a boss. It's a very shocking concept. Why not? Well, and one way of putting it is if you look at all those parts in the IKEA box that make up the person, you know, put them all in place. Think about this. There are probably a million parts. Think about this. Each part has a job, doesn't it? So even just a hand, think of this, just a hand, one hand, it's got many, many parts. And think about this, it's so intelligent because the hand itself, if you like, each part does its job. The ring finger is not going to argue with the little finger. You get away, you're doing my job. They've all got their job and they all do it automatically. Can you hear my point? The thumb does a job, then the ligaments do a job, and the veins do a job, and the skin does a job, and the bones do a job, and they all do their job beautifully, and then they all work together to function as a hand. You don't need another piece called the boss hand that runs the parts, which is this exaggerated view of an intrinsic something. The parts do their job fine on their own. So the parts of an I, it's the same. So if you did think each part has a job, then so each part, you say, well, the job of the nose, the job of the eye, the job of anger, the job of every single tiny part. If you had a list of all the components, you'd have thousands, and next to it, what's its function? You would write it down. So then you put an I down and say, what's its function? Well, the first thing we say, oh, it's the boss. Well, you discover you don't need a boss. If you want a boss, really, you can't find a boss, but the starting point is intention of all the parts of the body and the mind. That's the starting point, intention, I will, and then everything flows from there. So you almost can't find a boss even among the parts. They all work together, but we're very convinced you need a boss. It freaks us out to think we don't need a creator. We don't need a manager. It's shocking to us, you know, it's quite shocking because that's how we think. I mean, the Muslims say the world is so amazing, there has to be an architect. Buddha disagrees. We all do fine. All the components of a universe called sentient beings do fine creating their own mess and hopefully creating their own happiness. All the parts of our mind and body do fine functioning as a Rabina. So what we've got to try and do is harness and get rid of the negative bits, the anger and the jealousy, because they're making a mess, and then get rid of them and at least develop the positive parts of my mind, and then the person will be a lovely person. It'd be a very harmonious person. If everybody in the world behaved nicely, all the parts of the universe called the different sentient beings would work harmoniously together. If you get rid of the delusions in here, all the parts will be working very harmoniously, and you'll be a very healthy, happy person. You don't need a boss. This is the key one to think about. You don't need a boss. It's a shocking concept. Yes, Rose.
Thank you, Rabina. While you're talking, I keep feeling I get it and I lose it. I get it.
No, that's exactly right, darling. It's okay.
And then I lose it.
What happened. That's it.
So where does intention come from? If there's no
intention,
I,
what do you mean by come from?
well, so if there's no I, where does
there's no boss?
Where does a positive intention come from?
Previous moments of itself. Everything is a continuity of mental. Everything, Roz. This is where you've got to get karma, cause and effect. So, you know, where does intention come from? It's a part of the mind. It's a tendency in the mind. It's a particular mental factor that is the part of the mind that is really volition. I will. Where does it come from? The previous moment of that type of mind. Where does anger come from? A previous moment of anger. Where does yesterday's anger come from? The day before's anger. Where does the day before's anger come from? The life before. Where does that anger come from? The life before. Where does that anger come from? You'll never find a first moment. We want to find a first big bang moment. You won't find one. Everything is a continuity of moments. Do you see what I'm saying? We have a view that there's a little person in there who runs it all. The I puts it all together. We say the words, I decide, but you know, it's just we're over exaggerating the status of that I. Intention, all the parts do their job. You can say, I am holding a mug. a thermos. It's a truth. Let's analyze it. Which part of I? The body. Which part of the body? The hand. Which part of the hand? The thumb, the finger, the ring, the this, the ligaments. They all do their job, all together working harmoniously to have the experience of Robina holding a mug. You don't need any more than that. But the mind runs it. If this is a dead body, don't worry. There's got to be a mind here. And what are the parts of the mind? Well, the first one is intention. I will hold the mug. Then all the other bits do their job. Attention, discrimination, mindfulness, concentration, decision, determination. All of those do their job. And the hand then holds the mug. When the mind ceases, the hand will drop the mug. So we've got to get used to thinking of the parts, what their job is. When you label a thing, a job, everything has a label and a job. And if you do that for each part, you'll think, well, what's the job of the I? There is no job left because there isn't such a thing. That's the way to try and think. Do you understand?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Good.
you.
Yeah. So one of the arguments about how there can't be a separate I, it all sounds so silly, but analyze it. So I use the example, let's say I have a thermos and a mala. So that's a statement of fact. If you look at with your eyes onto this person, you're going to see a mala, you're going to see an I, and you'll see a thermos. 3 separate, independent phenomena. And you have to prove it's true. If I make that statement, you've got to find 3 things. It's very clear because I said 3 nouns, didn't I? Mala, and thermos. So that means in the simplest example, they're independent. These are independent and separate. Independent meaning, if the thermos breaks, the mala is intact. If the thermos breaks, Robina is intact. If the mala breaks, the thermos is not affected. So this shows they're utterly independent and separate. Now I'll say the same statement. I have a nose and an ear. There too, you've got to point out to 3 separate phenomena. We think there are 3 separate phenomena. We think you can point to an ear. We can. We can point to a nose, but we think we can point to the third one, the eye, in here somewhere, that isn't the nose and isn't the ear. So now, as in just the same way, if the thermos breaks, the mala is left intact because they're independent and separate. But and the ear is left intact if the nose is broken. But we think if there is an I that is separate, then it would be left intact when you punch me in the nose. When I say, you punched me, you will say, no, Robina, I punched the nose. So if there were an I in there that is not related to the nose and is not related to the ear, the eye will be saying, oh, phew, I'm glad that, Tara didn't punch me. She only punched the nose, and the eye will feel a big sigh of relief. I mean, that's a joke, right? But it's the logical deduction. If there were a separate me. Yes, Terry.
Hello, Venerable.
Oh, darling, yes.
A short question. And do you have any volunteer positions or volunteer support positions for the prison project? Something that could be done from afar?
Absolutely, no, very much. I don't run the prison project anymore, but certainly if you write to Liberation Prison Project, they have many people who write letters to people in prison. That's a very good way to support, to be a friend of someone in prison. So if you look up Liberation Prison Project, and you can write to them, and they have always people helping. Absolutely.
Okay.
It'll be wonderful, darling.
Thank you.
Offer kindness to people. That's good. Catherine, yes.
Hello, Venerable.
Yes.
Without an I, what is it that's observing?
What, darling?
Without an I,
Yes.
what is observing?
The mind.
On the thing I think I'm observing. If there's no
That's
I.
the word we use. We use the word, and there's a very big way people talk about meditating. They talk about the witness watching. It's not that there's no I watching, it's your mind. Your mind has many parts, okay? So when you sit down to meditate, your body sits in a certain position, and then your mind, you're trying to train your mind. So we say, I am training my mind because it's a conventional language. It's fine to say that. But which part of you is meditating? Well, first you have to have intention. I will concentrate. Then you have to have mindfulness, which brings you back to the object. Then you have to have attention, does the job of looking. Mindfulness brings you back, the attention back to the object. Discrimination, each has their job. Like the hand, each part of the mind does the job of meditating. But we say, I am observing. No, part of your mind is observing. We just use the label I for all of those bits, but we then give too much status to that I, as if there's another piece along walking with the hand, with the mind. So it's just a way of talking. So the mind does the observing, the mind decides, the mind gets angry, the mind concentrates. That's the job of the mind, and all the parts of the mind do their job. And in meditation, we're trying to train. So the observing is part of the mind. We say all of it's the I, but the mind is like, I am holding a mug. Which part? The hand. I am observing. Which part? Your mind. You get my point?
Yes, I do. Thank you very
Good.
much.
Good, Katrine. Yeah, something else. So all, see, this is just, you know, language. We've got to get used to the language. We can't just make up what we think it means. It's really quite precise, you know. So it's kind of interesting. So we're trying to prove in the typical 4-point analysis, first, Buddha's telling us, sorry, guys, I have found there is no intrinsic I. And so, but you don't just believe me, you've got to prove it to yourself. So one approach is the 4-point analysis. And the first one, and this is, once you've got this one, you're done, you've done the job, is to, Buddha says, even though there's no intrinsic I, we believe so utterly there is, and we act on the basis of there being one, of this. So we've got to first establish the object to be negated. So if you're, and then he wants us to then establish the parameters. He wants us to search for the I. It sounds hilarious. So first of all, you have to establish what you're searching for. You've got to establish what you're searching for. You've got to establish what you think the independent I is. And this is the tricky part. Then the second point, you establish the parameters of your search. You establish there's either an I that's oneness with the parts, or there is an I that's separate from the parts. You've only got these two options. 3, you then do the next 2 steps, which are disproving both of those. So this clear, rigorous, gradual type of analysis you do first intellectually and then in your meditation. So when you can conclude there is neither an independent an I independent of the parts, nor is there an I that is oneness with the parts, you have realized the absence of the independent I. But then you realize subtle dependent arising, merely labeled. Then you realize subtle dependent arising. As His Holiness says, the I is not empty of intrinsic nature because you can't find one, and you won't. But that's not the real premise. The I is empty because it's dependent arising. So when you realize the absence of that I in here, you will then realize dependent arising. Then you've got the 2 truths together. Then you have the 2 truths. So there isn't an intrinsic I, but there is a dependent arising I. But when you realize there's no intrinsic I, it's as if there's no I. But there is an I, but it's so subtle, it's as if there's no I. That's the way Lama Zopa puts it. It's very delicious. Yes, Lorna.
In the 8 verses of thought transformation, they use the term mental continuum.
Give me the phrase, the sentence.
Oh, it's the phrase that goes to like when a delusion or a harmful thought,
okay, good.
for instance, enters my mental continuum.
Okay, fine. Good. Okay, fine. So the question?
So the mental continuum, is that another way of describing
Mind.
the nature of mind?
No, it's just another term for the conventional mind. The mental continuum, the continuity of consciousness. I mean, it's just trying to get us the feeling it's not this isolated moment, but this moment of mind is the result of a direct previous moment of mind, and that goes to the previous moment of mind, and this mental continuum is beginningless.
Right.
And endless. So it's just another term used. Yes, exactly.
So is
exactly.
that in relationship to emptiness?
No,
again?
not at all.
No.
Nothing to do.
Okay.
Nothing to do. Nothing to do.
Okay.
It's another term for mind. Another way they just use to refer to our consciousness, our mind, our continuity of moments of mind. That's all.
Okay.
Do you
Thank you.
understand?
Yes.
Okay, Laura. Good, good. So any questions, people?
Yes, Elena has a question.
Good, Elena, darling, talk to me.
Hello, Venerable.
Hello,
Thank you for
happy
your
to see you.
teaching.
Good.
You referred something before in the answer about the parts of the mind, and I just wonder if there's a direct transfer of that the body consists out of the little parts, the bones and the hands and the nose. Can you also kind of how do you say put the mind in the different components or parts?
Of course, darling. Of course. Okay, a general statement of truth in general, everything in the universe, if it exists in dependence upon its pieces, its parts. That's the whole point. Whatever you posit, even the millimeter of the tiniest atom in the universe, it is necessarily made of parts. So whatever exists is made of parts. So the mind, what are the parts of mind? Well, this moment of mind, yesterday's mind, anger, love, compassion, gross mind, subtle mind, eye consciousness, ear consciousness. Mind is a label for the millions of bits of parts of my mind. That's all, of course, exactly the same, darling. And that's the point about the Buddhist analysis. Not the parts of the brain we're discussing here. We're discussing the parts of the non-physical, cognitive, subjective process itself. And that's what's called the mental factors. You know, they refer to that, the parts of the mind, like all the different feelings and emotions, they call them mental factors. And they've each got their own function. There are the deluded ones, there are the positive ones, and then there are the mechanical ones, like I call, and we have to learn to know these parts intimately and well, and to know what their function is. So anger exaggerates the ugliness of your boyfriend and makes you want to kill him. And attachment thinks your boyfriend is design, and you want to love, divine, you want to love him. All the parts of our mind are there, and we have to identify them. Right now, there's this big soup of emotion. We can't tell one bit from another, but this is the real job to have to do conventionally with meditation, to learn to know our mind intimately and see the different parts, and then want to get rid of the rubbish parts that don't see reality and cause us suffering, and want to develop the good parts. Do you understand? Good.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks, darling. What else, people? I mean, all I've done is just touch on these things, just touched on these things in our discussions. So I think please read Thupten Pende's course notes. He's gone to much more detail. But what I've been saying was give you a basis for understanding what he's saying, I think, So to summarize, really, the general point Buddha's making from beginning to end is that we suffer because we have misconceptions in the mind. So therefore, the job is to get rid of the misconceptions. And we are happy because of the virtues in our mind. And our job is to develop the virtues to perfection. And that's Buddha. Buddha implies the eradication of the delusions, therefore of suffering. Da implies the development to perfection of goodness, therefore happiness. This is where he talks, So all the way along, we're talking about trying to get in touch with reality. So first, conventional reality, karma, impermanence, realms of existence, continuity of consciousness. These are all the conventional realities for the Buddha. And that's a stepping stone, at least to get in touch with conventional reality. We're on the right track. And then we get to the mind, we get rid of the rubbish ones, the attachment, the anger, the fears, and the jealousy, and the nonsense. At least we can develop the virtues in our mind. And then we get to the compassion wing. And now we do the bodhisattva path. And finally we get Shinei, and then rid the mind of the root delusion. And then we're Buddha, then we're Buddha. Well, then if we're on the Mahayana path, we now go from junior school to high school to university. Now we're going to go to postgraduate. So next module is postgraduate. And emptiness, so this is the point, just as a prelude to the next module. What we've just done in the Lam Rim, one way of presenting this packaging is the three principal aspects of the path. So these are the prerequisites for entering into Tantra. First is renunciation, which is abiding by the laws of karma, giving up the lower realm suffering, and then getting rid of the delusions, which is giving up the suffering of change. And then you renounce suffering and its causes, the first prerequisite. Second, bodhicitta. And then third is at least an appreciation for the meaning of emptiness, because Tantra, without understanding emptiness, is totally meaningless. And without bodhicitta, which is the yogis, the great Mahayana yogis, bodhicitta, this amazing wish to benefit others, is what drives their wish to practice Tantra, because it gets you enlightened more quickly. So these are the 3 prerequisites. So we've done all that now, and then we can go to the next module, which is Tantra. So without emptiness, Tantra is a joke. So we will talk more about emptiness. There's no question in Tantra. No question. We must. With that understanding, it's a semblance of an emptiness. Turning yourself into a green lady is like a science fiction joke, Turning yourself into some dude called Yamantaka with 47 legs and 1 million arms that will scare the life out of you sounds like complete science fiction, superstition, madness. So without understanding, nothing has an intrinsic nature. Without understanding even the meaning of the word Buddha, Tantra has no meaning. And then the other one is because we're trying to utilize, it's the most sophisticated psychology, and because it's trying to utilize the delusions, that's completely impossible if you don't even know what delusion is, particularly attachment. If you don't know what attachment is, you can't possibly utilize it. It's like a joke. That's why you have to have the 3 prerequisites: renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness. That prepares you to enter into these more sophisticated practices, which we're going to discuss next module. Any questions to finish, sweetie pies? So we're going to, when we talk about, so the essence of everything we've done so far is leading us to Tantra. And again, I'm going to repeat these things in an essential way in order to see how we need renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness to even begin to comprehend this concept of Tantra, which is more sophisticated, more advanced, more marvelous, more amazing. Not more, just marvelous, amazing, sophisticated, brilliant psychology. Okay, petals, that'll do. It's 4:30 in the morning here, still dark. I'm in Melbourne, which I don't recognize. Of course I don't, since I was a child. I've hardly lived in Melbourne for years. But just this massive city of 5 million people now with massive, big, tall buildings. And I'm in a building, an Airbnb. I decided I wouldn't stay with my sisters. I've got a place nearby. So I'm in the center of town with on the 25th floor. It's very peculiar, actually. All these big glass buildings everywhere. You see through the dark, watching all the people, like Rear Window, that movie of Hitchcock, except in 24-story buildings. Some of them are 60-story. Anyway, I'm just chatting away here. So also I'm seeing my family. I told you my darling sister Jan fell down the stairs and died. And there were 7 of us. And we always wondered who'd die first. So now we know. So now we don't say there are 7 of us, we say there are 6 of us. And normally when we're together, when I come home, we have kind of group parties, But this time I decided I'd take each one of them out individually. So I've just had dinner with Judy. Judy's my sister, who's a chiropractor, but also a lawyer now, and she defends. She became a lawyer when she was about 70 or something, 65 maybe, and now she's got a team of 20 lawyers. She's doing amazingly. She defends all the victims of the pedophiles, the Catholic pedophiles and everything. And then that's Judy. I had dinner with Judy. Then I had dinner with Polly. Polly's a painter. She's like a hippie and a painter. Her nephew Amiel made Chasing Buddha, that movie, 20 years ago. He makes movies. And then there's Tony, my brother. He's coming tomorrow. He lives in the country. He's coming. He's the last one in the family. He's coming tomorrow night to stay with me, and I'll take him for dinner. And then Julie, I'll take Julie for dinner yet. I haven't taken her for dinner. Who else is there? Oh, Mary, my darling sister Mary. She just discovered after our sister died, she discovered that one of her husband has cancer. So she's preoccupied with that. She's got about 7 children and about 57 grandchildren. So I can't see all of them. So that's my family in Melbourne. Okay. And I leave next Wednesday. And then I go to Sydney for a few days, and the Blue Mountains, to the centre there, and a little Sakya group in a town called Milton on the coast. And then I go to Queensland, where I go to Brisbane, where pink-haired Millie, maybe you've seen Miffy in some of the teachings, pink hair, that's Miffy. I've known Miffy since she was blonde and 9. Now she's tall with pink hair. And she's outrageous, and she teaches quite a few. You see it on Zoom. I'm going to her centre. And then I go to the centre called Chen Raising Institute, which is 100 miles north of there, which is the first self-empty centre in this country, where I first met the Lamas in 1976. June 76, I met them there. So I'll go there, and then I'll go to Adelaide, which is on the south of the country, to Buddha House and teach there for a week. And then I'll fly to Malaysia on the way to Kathmandu and lead the trek up to Mama Zoba's cave. If I make it, I don't know, I'm getting a bit of asthma these days, so we'll see what happens. Maybe I can't. I'll have to be carried by 17 porters, So that's it. And then I go. Then I'm going to back to America then. All right, just my story. Thank you, precious ones. So I'll be 3 more mornings at 3 o'clock, I think, or 4 more mornings at 3 o'clock, but I don't mind. I get a call at 2:30 from Tara. She's so kind. Okay, darlings. Jangchub, Semchog, Rinpoche, Make, Panam, Keguchig, Kepa Nyampa, Mepa Yang, Gongne, Gondu, Pabashog, and Jangchub, Semchog, Rinpoche, Make, Panam, Keguchig, Kepa Nyampa, Mepa Yang, Gongne, Gondu, Pabashog. So thinking. Every moment of listening, we're sowing seeds. So all these marvelous seeds we've planted, may we keep nourishing these seeds with our practice so that they eventually will ripen as our Buddhahood, as we motivated, so we can be a benefit to others. And may bodhicitta grow and grow in the hearts of all, and may the realization of emptiness grow and grow in the hearts of all. And may our holy lamas live long. We need them badly on this planet. May they live long. That's it. Precious ones, thank you so much. So we're seeing each other in a week, right? There's no week off, is there? Okay, next Thursday, we'll start Tantra.
Yes.
Okay, darling. Much love.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
You so